Good morning, everyone. My name is Meredith Jaffé, and on behalf of Newcastle Writers Festival, welcome to our In Conversation with Smells Like Teen Spirit with Sarah Macdonald and Cathy Wilcox. Seems like a very appropriate conversation for us to be having today with the kids all currently working remotely, parents working remotely, and if you're anything like me, you're desperately socially isolating from the teens right now. Before I introduce Sarah and Cathy formally, I'd like to take this opportunity to say that even though we are in a virtual festival format, we would love everyone to be a part of the festival and share on their social media. The hashtag for this year is NWF Stories for You. That's NWF Stories for You. So share on your socials so that we can kind of reach as large an audience as possible. At the end of the session, you'll see a link that will take you through to Maclean's Booksellers, where you can buy the fabulous book that we're talking about today. So you're having a teenager. And you will see a donate button at the end of the session. Now, these sessions are free, but clearly writers' festivals are struggling to maintain a presence in a very fluid environment. So if you are inclined, a donation would be fantastic, and the link will take you through to the Newcastle Writers' Festival website. Now, let's start with our introductions. Sarah Macdonald is an ABC journalist. I think you should wave, Sarah, so we can bring you up on the screen. Is an ABC journalist and author of the international bestseller Holy Cow. Sarah co-hosts the storytelling event and comedy podcast The Full Catastrophe with Rebecca Huntley. She is the parent of two terrific teens. She has to say that. They're right there in the house, both of whom would declare this book fully sick, but they have refused to read it. My other guest is Cathy Wilcox.
Yes, they could walk past any moment, so they might make a cameo.
If they do, they have to eye roll. That's my only stipulation for breaking into the session.
Okay, and you can hear Cathy's dog already as well.
Oh, that's right. I've got the cats joined me, the dogs joined. It's a fluid thing. Cathy is a cartoonist for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age, and she's been drawing them for them since 1989, which is an incredible body of work, as well as illustrating numerous children's books and collecting Children's Book Council commendations for her work and 3 Walkley Awards along the way. She is a mother of 2 children who have almost made it through the teenage years. I think, my undying congratulations on that, Cathy. And she does have an eternally childlike dog who has joined us for the conversation. Welcome, Sarah and Cathy.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
First things first, of course, what prompted you to come up with the concept of an A to Z of adolescence?
Well, there was lots of reasons. It kind of came together, but Cathy had teenagers, and so she was, not having anyone show her unbridled passion and joy when she got home. And so I suggested she needed someone to talk to, so she got a dog. So we would go on dog walks together and we would talk about teenage life. And there's Tilly now. And so she got her dog. We started going for walks and we just were talking about teenagers a lot. And then I got approached to do a book about the motherload in kids. And I said, you know what? I love toddlers, I love babies, I'm a baby sniffer, but I find teenagers just so much more infinitely fascinating, and that's where we're at right now. So that's kind of how it happened, and really we didn't envisage how the world would change for teenagers and for all of us when we were writing it.
As well as the fact that on all of our dog walks, that would throw up, every day would throw up a new issue for discussion. Whether Sarah's daughter and my son are only about a year apart, and they were in neighbouring schools, and so there'd be a little bit of intersection in what was going on in her school and our school and so forth. We'd hear the gossip, or we'd hear the stories, and we would just think sometimes that this was a world of mystery in some ways that could do with a bit of decoding and understanding.
I just want to start by setting the benchmarks for what we define as successful parenting of teens. I recall a few years ago a lady in a bookstore, funnily enough, saying to me that her definition of raising successful kids to the age of 19 was that if you hadn't had the cops knock on your door at 3 a.m., then you've done a good job. Is that bar too high, too low? I mean, how do you define successful parenting of this difficult transition to adulthood?
Look, I think that's a pretty good one, actually. I mean, some people just say, you know, alive and not in jail. I think you've learned to change your kind of standards and your expectations, and that's part of what having a teenager is. But your own definition of success is so personal. What do you reckon, Kath?
Absolutely. You're employing adaptive management the whole way along, and there can be all kinds of assumptions that you're making in your own little world. I remember we were going through a bit of a difficult time, but I ran into a friend from Mother's Group, and I hadn't seen her. You know, my child was about 17, and so therefore was hers, because they'd been babies together, but we hadn't seen each other for about 15 years. And so we were sort of saying, so how's your little kid going? And she was at that point saying, we've had 6 months without him being picked up by the police. So things are going really well. So in her world, that was things improving. And whatever it was that we were going through at the time was suddenly cast into a completely different perspective, from the fact that I didn't need to be, you know, maybe I didn't need to be worried that much about the social problems that were happening then. But I think the thing is that everybody has their cross to bear, as it were. Everybody has their things that go on, and they can be big and small, and they can be macro and they can be micro, but all of it requires a bit of understanding and management and you know, a bit of maybe strategy to get you through.
Deep wells of compassion.
Absolutely. So compassion and self-compassion as well. Yes, and I do suggest you avoid those other parents. And now I guess there's no school sport. You won't be standing on the sidelines hearing about how Johnny won debating, and then Freddie's going to be in the Olympics for sailing and all that kind of stuff. And those parents that people just go and start hyperventilating. Perhaps that's one good thing out of this. We've just got to compare ourselves to what we, you know, see as successful. And I think that is just being all alone and with each other in this time, and kind of, you know, having moments together that are okay, and that everybody's okay, really. Like this, I think, will change our definitions of success, because it's huge change for them. Adaptation is going to be big.
Yes. Although in some ways I think they're better adapted than us as adults. I mean, my kids are loving online learning as a new form, because I'm sure it gives them an excuse to really be on Spotify or TikTok or something else, as they quickly flick the screen when mum walks past back to geography. Is there a defining moment do you think there is a defining moment when your darling child, that beautiful little creature that you raised, suddenly switches into puberty? And if so, what do you think is sort of the key markers of suddenly becoming a teenager?
Oh, look, I think for a lot of people, they often say it's the first eye roll. It's the first, you know, which can come at a tween. It can come earlier than teen. So it can be the first eye roll. It can be that first day where you give them a hug and they do that. It can be that moment you wake up, where I had with my son, where he'd go to bed smaller than me and then he woke up one morning taller than me, because he'd just grow that much overnight. So I think there's often not one moment. It's like anything. There's just lots of incremental ones. Or it's the first grunt, the first monosyllabic grunt, or the first I hate you, or the first you don't understand. I mean, there's lots of them, isn't it? Everyone probably take a pick. We could have like a board and you could just sort of do lotto of any of them, I reckon.
Just a Pinterest setup. Kathy, I was curious. Go.
I was going to say, I would add to that, the you know, beyond the eye rolls and all that sort of thing, I didn't suffer too heavily from those things, but also the actual pleasure of being able to have on the level discussions with your kids, that you don't have, that you suddenly realise that you were having a pretty much adult discussion on an issue, and they were understanding things from a more not absolutely grown up point of view, but you didn't have to sort of temper your language or your concepts too much, because they could be understanding things from a more grown up point of view. And I think that was a point of teenage, you know, or becoming adolescence that I actually really enjoyed, and the sense of humour as well, when the sense of humour just sort of flourished and
And do you find that now that you're almost through the other side, Cathy, what are you finding are the key markers for them finishing this, this terrible period where they've been mired in the turbulent years of hormones and angst?
Well, I mean, the parenting is ongoing in a lot of ways, and there are some things. My daughter, who's 22, sort of still needs me for social dilemmas and things like that. But I guess the noticeable thing has been for my son, for example, to emerge through the black and white time. The black and white time being the time in which morality was divided into the world is divided into the good people and the bad people, and the good people are fabulous and they're heroes, and the bad people are to be condemned, and there shouldn't actually be a place for them in the world, and why can't they all be locked away in a jail and all that sort of thing, and now to find a growing appreciation that life is complex, that people are complex, that you need to cut people slack, and that's been something that's been an ongoing thing I've urged for a long, long time, and it's a fine thing to see them coming through it and reflecting on their own judgment in the past.
And we have got black and white thinking in here, actually, because it's one of the hallmarks of the sort of developing brain and all that kind of stuff. But let's also remember that a lot of adults don't get beyond that stage of development. So when your child does, that is just like brilliant. That is an amazing adult, because a lot of adults don't get it. And we do want to point out, I think, clearly from the beginning, that we love this generation of teenagers. They are just wonderful. They're awesome. We have such great and profound respect and deep wells of admiration and love for them, because they're great. They're just so astute and aware and intelligent and creative and amazing, and sure, they can be tricky to live with, but we have great faith in them. So we want to say that right from the beginning. This is not
answered my very next question. So welcome, Sarah. But I think we still need to talk about those, ubiquitous sides of the teenage years, always funny in hindsight, perhaps never funny when you're going through it, and that's sex and drugs and rock and roll. An area that seems to have changed in my lifetime of parenting teens. My eldest is actually now 29, so I've been doing this a while. Hence the grey hair. When we used to talk,
we're all going to have grey hair at the end of this, don't worry.
That's right. When we used to talk about sex and drugs and rock and roll, we meant the act in the back of the panel van. Now, when I talk to my teens, I'm talking about the gender of my children and their cohort at school. And sexual orientation has become a complete minefield for the unsuspecting parents. We've gone from having a he-she world to a whole lot of other pronouns and definitions. What's happening with teens now? Why are we going through that now, do you think?
I think, for one thing, the dam burst open. I think once kids had a vocabulary, a lexicon to describe these things, that suddenly became a thing which explained a lot of confusion for a lot of kids. So when people kind of fret about the idea that it's catching, and that the mere fact of talking about all this variant sexuality and gender is the cause of it all. I don't think at all that it's the cause. I think it's the fact that it has become it's now recognised, and it's a thing which previously maybe people would just be locked away in their own confusion about how they didn't fit in and how they didn't feel normal around other people, and kind of having to just put up with not belonging. We've had to navigate a bit of this stuff in our lives, and what is really interesting to see is how the teenagers themselves, broadly speaking, are so much quicker to adapt to it all than we are. They kind of go, okay, yeah, all right, that's that person's pronoun, no problem. And they see it where we might agonize over, but how am I going to get used to saying this name or that word? They go, hey, look, how hard can it be? Just make an effort. and so they're the ones who are sort of bringing us along sometimes on this difficult ride. And then on the other hand, I've had the experience of my parents' generation, or my mother at least, while being conservative in terms of if she would be asked if she felt something, some gender variance was normal or acceptable or all the rest of it, she might have said theoretically no, but when it comes down to the basic principle of life and parenting, she'd say, well, you love your child whoever they are.
Yeah.
And so applying that principle of love and acceptance to these particular kids who are going through what they're going through, you have to end up concluding that who am I to say that that's not the right way of being, and maybe I just have to go with this. It wasn't what was usually happening around my childhood, but then I don't know what was in the hearts and minds of people in my childhood that I rubbed along with, and so I think there's a lot of change, but I think that it's actually the young people who are helping us deal with that change.
Yeah. And it's been great actually when we've been doing when we had been doing events for the book, there was a lot of grandparents coming to the room because I think they show a great willingness to bridge that generational gap, because in some ways it's smaller than ever, but this is one area where it's never than ever, and that understanding, and I think that's been really fascinating. I think Cathy's right. It's like now, because they live in such a non-world and because of social media, they reach across countries, they reach borders. They're a borderless generation until now, and all the borders have been shut. So that means that if your child has never found a peer group or never found people who understand that they're going through something, shushly, they can now doing that online. And that's her noisiest child, by the way. And so they are finding their people. And a lot of parents who worry a lot about them being online all the time, and of course there are concerns about that, and we talk about that in the book, and setting limits and boundaries and that kind of stuff in the online world. You can be bullied in your own bedroom. At the same time, they might be finding people that they connect with that they can't find in their immediate area. But it's also, I think, about the search for identity, right? So, this generation say we don't like this, and then they'll come home and say, oh, so-and-so came home as, out as bi today, or, and pan or something. They don't even quite understand what they're saying now, because when we search for identity, searching in a way for definitions and labels that give us identity. So I think there's a lot of that going on at the same time. And that's okay, because that's what you're meant to do when you're a teenager.
Absolutely. And the other aspect of sex, which is a very live issue in our family as well, is the perniciousness of the pornography aspects of life, and not just kids under the blanket with the laptop looking at things that we'd rather they weren't, but even within the classroom, in the maths lesson, that there's somebody in the classroom who's got their VPN, skirting around the whole school's technology issues. Hopefully I'm not terrifying parents who aren't here yet, but, and redefining sexuality, not necessarily in a very good way for a whole generation as well. So there's sort of two aspects to that, isn't there?
Yeah, and we do X for X-rated in here. The porn thing is really scary, especially because they say, your first sort of glimpse of sexual experience imprints on you very powerfully. And if they're really young, it can actually imprint on them very powerfully and be destructive. And, they can be sitting in a maths lesson and someone texts a picture of something that is pornographic. And, a lot of kids are seeing this. We've got the figures, and it's unavoidable. It's about conversations you have with your child about what they're seeing and what kind of sex that is. And it's really important to have these conversations, because they need to know that just because a girl in a video likes that sort of sexual act doesn't mean that their girlfriend may, for instance. And I think in a way it can be, whole porn conversation, I don't want to get into it now, it can be destructive, especially when it's too young and too much. And, it's definitely concerning, and it's all about having conversations about that, which are really hard and really embarrassing and really awkward and really weird. And that's the other reason Cathy got a dog, is because sometimes when you've got a teenager, those face-to-face conversations are really tricky to have, and it's good to have them when you're doing driving lessons or, you're walking around the block with them, because these are tricky. These are in-depth, powerful conversations, and you've got to have them, unfortunately. Sorry, parents, it's scary, but you do.
And the other thing that it concerns me about it too is that how it feeds into body image, which is another big teenage, kind of hurdle, if you like, is them, exploring how they feel about their bodies, isn't it?
Yeah. And body image, like with the eating disorders, we've just had eating disorders, they're in our generation as well. But what's interesting is now wrong is that boys are getting them as well.
Yes.
They either want to have the uber groovy, skinny kind of rock and roll aesthetic, or the bigorexia where they're pumping and taking up supplements and this kind of stuff. So they're now being sucked into that vortex as well. And that's and there's also this sort of healthy eating TikTok girls who eats 59 bananas a day and sort of this healthy eating drip stuff as an eating disorder as well. You've really got to keep an eye on this and what they're thinking about food and how they're behaving around food.
Mm-hmm.
How's your body image, Kath? Where's your dog? Did you muzzle her?
My dog has been put into the kitchen and the door has been shut behind her so she can have a little bit of a think about it. Yeah.
Parents still worry. Parents still worry a lot about drugs and the drug scene, and we're obviously seeing stuff on TV these days around pill testing, around body searching teens as they go to concerts, and the other area is vaping. I mean, it's changed in one sense, hasn't it? Kids generally don't smoke cigarettes so much anymore. They're lower on some of the drugs that used to be the concerns of our parents' generation. What are you seeing as active teen parenting and in terms of drugs these days?
Active teen parenting?
Yes, active teen parenting, aren't
you? So do you want me to answer for a little bit for one thing?
You answer that while I think about active teen parenting.
You've got some actual stats on drugs and so forth, and I a lot of these topics I feel like I sort of skirted the side, or we were incredibly lucky because we did get into those things. But as far as the drugs and the alcohol stuff went, we always knew, or we always as the result of our own childhoods and upbringing, we understood that the total prohibition, you cannot touch this, you are not allowed to do that often provokes the backlash, and that being totally prohibitive about things, especially when your own behaviour models an opposite. When you've got parents who hit the grog, frequently on a weekend, or have to get the taxi home because they've had too much and all the rest of it, and they're telling their kids, don't you touch it, or there'll be big trouble for you. We kind of think that hypocritical approach is it doesn't really work, because the kids are going to go, well, I can see what you're doing, and why should I listen to what you say? Yeah. We almost had to come at it from another point of view, from the perspective that without having been super moral as parents to our kids, and having said, when they would say, I'm never going to do that, and I'm never going to smoke, and I'm never going to drink, and they'd be really disapproving, we would have to then, well, I would anyway, say, look, this is what I did when I was a teenager, okay? And I got that, I learned something from it and through it, but it doesn't, if you happen to slip one day and it happens, and if you happen to weaken and decide that day that you're going to have some drink, don't that that's going to be the end of life for you.
If you slip into the vodka fountain, it's not the world. Yeah,
not the end of the world. So to try and get them to be little less judgmental on their peers and a little bit less judgmental on themselves, lest they think that other black and white thing, that's an all or nothing thing, that I've been perfect up until this point. Now I've got drunk and I'm imperfect and life is lost to me.
Yeah. So we should just put out the cartoon for that, because it's a good one, right? Because as parents, there's quite a bit of going on at the same time. But there's good news on this. They are drinking later than we did. They are taking less later. They're having sex later. So there is good news on this. They're generally better behaved, quite possibly than their parents.
To discuss consent for sex anyway, you know, but to work out whether anyone's ready to
well, some of them. But the thing is, I mean, and it's hard to generalise, right? But on the main, when you look at the statistics, they are drinking later. And the important thing is to delay the onset of drinking and drug taking. The longer you delay it onto their brain, body, the better, in terms of their behaviour, in terms of the effect on their brain, in terms of their chances of addiction and going off the rails, right? You want to delay it as long as possible because they're going to try stuff. But the good news is that good news is there. But, of course, we live in a drinking culture, I think, in Australia, and that's what people realise, and a lot of teenagers pick up on that. I've heard kids who worked in pubs who are like 20 years old, 10, 20 years old, and just got the $750 Centrelink and have bought a pallet of beer and are holding up in their house right now, okay? This stuff, it's kind of the Australian mentality. There is a binge drinking mentality. And so you need to be aware of that, and you need to be, you know, we go into parties. If you're hosting a party, what you need to do, your responsibilities. You can't serve alcohol to kids under 18. You're breaking the law. But you also want to be that sort of parent that is the parent that they're open to, who has the conversations with them. Because if someone does paralytic at a party and passes out and they're too scared to call their parent, right, you want to be the parent that call. You want to be the parent that goes, and you want to be the parent that knows what's happening, because you could have these sort of, if you know what's going on, that knowledge is power, I think, in this. And if they call you, you might get vomit in your car, but you know what's going on. You know who's drinking the most. You know who's endangering, you know, the role your child is having at the same time, and you want to just make sure that they're safe. So, yeah, that goes back to what Kath was saying before, that hardwired, don't do it kind of thing. You've got to be realistic. It's minimisation. And we go into the vaping thing, which is concerning as well, right? Because they're deliberately marketing some of the vape cherry blossom flavour, you know, to the teenage girls and stuff. And it's seen as cool, like cigarette smoking was when we were younger. So there's definitely concerns there. They put it in their bras. There's all sorts of trick parties, and we go into some of those as well. You might learn something about, you know, why these kids are suddenly an interest of gardening if they come to your house. It's because they've buried vodka bottle the day before, right? So there's all sort of, you know, tricks of the trade. But Paul Dillon does say that most of the news is good in terms of the direction going and their attitudes, and I think there's some really good inroads here, but there will be time your child probably gets drunk and tries it. Just try and make it as late as possible.
I think we've only got time for one more question, sadly. And the last thing, I had more, but I would really like to just tackle perhaps lastly, and I must say for the sake of our audience that there's a lot of hilarious stuff in your book as well that tempers some of the very serious issues. But one of the last serious issues I feel is mental health. The high rates of anxiety of this generation, despite the fact that they're more socially connected than we were, but they might also have parents who are over helicopter, if you can over helicopter, but are helicoptering them. What are some of the issues that you're exploring in the book around anxiety and other mental health issues?
Yeah, look, I think that's the big one that a lot of people are really feeling, and they have got the highest rates of anxiety we've found in other generations. There's one study in here that says up to 75% or up to 90%, I think it is, of 12 girls are feeling anxious. Imagine what they're feeling now, right? So another year 12 girl, because everything is in the open and they don't know what's even going to happen to their end of year exams, stuff like that. There's definitely anxiety in here, and I don't think there's any one cause. It's true that a lot of people are saying it's their online world, it's TikTok, all that sort of stuff. I think that there's so much going on, but your parenting definitely influences it. And at a time, I think, where we're all feeling anxious, you've got to understand that anxiety is a bit catching. So we've got to try and not let our anxiety project onto theirs. You want to try and map your times when you're feeling stressed and anxious with each other so that you're not all kind of heighten each other's, right? You all go up in certain times. It's definitely a concern. And I think that it's something that, you know, we have to be very mindful of. And I do really think this period will be really interesting because this is an anxious period for everyone. And yet my year 12 girl's had some moments where she's just, right, but she is adapting really well. She's doing really, really well. I'm incredibly proud of her, and I think that there's a lot to learn from them about how they do this. This is showing them the resilience for the important things in life that they really need to learn.
Yeah, and can I add too that the idea that while you might kind of face this anxiety with your teens and be kind of going, well, why is it like this? And it's probably because you're spending too much time on your computer, or it's probably because you're not doing, you might be searching for reasons for the anxiety. And I think that it can be much more valuable, in fact, to put that aside and go, okay, well, we maybe need to take it seriously for the time being and actually try and help the kid who's suffering from anxiety. And if that means psychological, a therapist or something, a counsellor, so that they can talk to someone other than you, other than with all your perhaps baggage and judgment and the relationship you have with kids. If they can talk about it with the third party, that's a really good thing. And if they can know that they're being taken seriously when they have something like this, that can be immensely helpful as well. That can help them, help find a way through it. Being told that you don't feel the way you feel is a fairly futile thing.
Yes, you need to hear them out and acknowledge it, and you need to be the advocate. You can say, I can't solve things, but I'm going to get help. I'm going to find out what we can do to help you. And there's a lot of, if pain persists, see a doctor. Look, we're not doctors. We're not psychiatrists. I did psychology at uni. But I think you've got to show them also that when you have a problem, there are people who can help you. So you're modelling that behaviour as well in so many different when you do that. And you're telling them, it's okay, it'll be all right, I'm going to help you, we're going to get through this.
The very, very last question. Since we don't have an audience, I will get to have one last question, and this is a funny one for us to discuss because it is so true. And I'm talking about the teenage bedroom and issues of cleanliness, hygiene, privacy. What's your take-home message for those parents who are trying to get those 50 million cups and bowls of congealed wheat bix out of there? Are we setting our own expectations too high here on what we think a teenage bedroom should look like?
Well, our modelling has been that my standards are so low that my children ended up going, well, I'm going to be tighter than my mother anyway. One of them needed to move out of home to become the tidy freak. Another one occasionally goes through a whirlwind of tidying, because he realises that for his own kind of vanity, he needs a clear space. Sarah's got some good advice on this stuff too, I think.
Yes, look, it can be. My son had a sign on his door saying biohazard, do not enter, and I thought that was perfect for a while. I have to remember that the bedroom, and oh my gosh, I wish we could have smell-o-vision now. We could kind of, contrast smells of teenage bedrooms with, yes, the congealed tea, the Lynx deodorant if you've got a boy. It's just a cacophony, really, isn't it? But the thing is, it is sanctuary, and you don't want to violate that unless you're very worried about it. You need to recognise that it can be that. And I think, and every family different, but let it be messy to a point. Right? As long as it's not a health hazard, it is their place. But just try and shut the door or hold your breath when you walk past. I think, there's bigger things, right? There's more important things. There's more important things than the bedroom. But if it gives you an anxiety attack looking at it, just try not to look at it, right? Yes, it's a source of great stress in families. And I did hear of a family that the teenage daughter was slamming the door so much they took the door off its hinges. It's hardcore. That is very, very hardcore, because I do think we need to recognise it is their world, it's their sanctuary, it makes them feel safe and happy, and let them express their creativity in it. Unless their creativity is maggoty sandwiches. What?
Make them open the window nevertheless from time to time, because you need
close the door, but open the window.
Close the door, open the door. That should be the motto for the bedroom.
Ladies, we've run out of time. It's been an absolute delight and a steep learning curve for us all today. We're in the new world. It's been a great discussion, and I would like to just assure everyone out there watching us that this is a terrific book full of hilarious as well as pertinent tips on parenting, never more so in these fluid times. My name is Meredith Jaffé, and on behalf of Newcastle Writers Festival, thank you for joining us. And please join me wherever you are in thanking our guests, Sarah Macdonald, there's a teen right now, and Cathy Wilcox.
Thank you very much for having us.
And don't forget, everyone, that you can follow the link to buy the book from Maclean's bookstore, and you can follow the link to donate to Newcastle Writers Festival. Can we have a teen in shot? No, they're going to throw a shot on us.
No, I'm good. Back off. No.
Thank you very much, everyone.
To the hand.
Thank you very much, everyone. Travel safe. See you now.